rumination is one of the worst things you can experience in benzo withdrawal because it continuously sends a distress signal to that fight or flight center of the brain. And that fight or flight center is going to respond by pumping a bunch of chemicals that are only going to exacerbate your withdrawal symptoms, slow down your recovery, and potentially create more mental illness for you. So rumination is a pretty damn big deal. And one of the things that I see people ruminating the most over is all the benzo misinformation in the community. And you could fill the Grand Canyon with it. I mean, there is so much of it. And it gets repeated constantly amongst other people with such an authoritative tone as though it were all true. And I find that super frustrating. How many times someone says, well, coach, I can't take an SSRI. I go, why? Because you don't heal while you're on an SSRI. I go, what? Who told you that? And half the time, you guys don't even know who told you. I just heard that. You heard it somewhere. Well, look into that. That's absolutely not true. So I want to debunk some of these. As a coach who's worked with well over 1,000 people from around the world over the last 10 years, let me tell you what I've seen. And number one, SSRIs absolutely can be effective. Are they going to stop benzo withdrawal? No, nothing stops benzo withdrawal, right? It is its own unique problem. But a lot of times we bottom out. Like me personally, I got very depressed, suicidally depressed, and maybe I could have taken an SSRI, but I was so scared, like a lot of you, I would not touch it. I thought it was a death sentence. And now doing the job that I've done for so long here, I can tell you, I've had many people who got on an SSRI, maybe a low dose of Zoloft or something, and it did the trick. It lifted their depression, and as their depression lifted, the benzo withdrawal wasn't quite so severe. They started sleeping better, and they were able to taper, and then most of the time, they taper off the Zoloft. Is it ideal? No. Being in benzo withdrawal is not ideal, right? So I'm not thinking an SSRI is something we all need to jump on. No, I'm not saying that at all. I mean, you understand, I'm a holistic psychologist. My background's in holistic psychology. I prefer us all drug-free and holistic and living our best life naturally, right? But, desperate times calls sometimes for desperate measures. And sometimes with some people, SSRIs can absolutely be a lifesaver. I've seen this, guys. I've seen people who were, who tried to kill themselves, not just suicidal risk, but actually tried to harm themselves. And I've seen an SSRI save them. And I've seen people that came off benzos and were super depressed and needed a little bit of an SSRI or some type of antidepressant, and it was able to get them past that hump, and then they tapered off that. Right. Some of them maybe stayed on the SSRI because they said, hey, look, it's working for me. I don't have the anxiety. And, by the way, SSRIs is the first line defense. If you're going to go by big pharma, psychiatry's perspective, it's the first line defense against anxiety, not benzos. So if benzos went away, there would still be a lot of people that could get potential relief from their anxiety through an SSRI. That happens. A lot of us hate big pharma, and we don't want to admit it, but it's absolutely true, guys. You can look at the studies. There's, they've done at this point, thousands of studies, against control groups and things like that. And yes, SSRIs can absolutely have a big impact. Well, so can exercise, right? 30 minutes of intense cardio a day over the period of 90 days has been shown to be as effective as Zoloft. So not saying, again, that you should be on an SSRI or that, any of that. So please hear me before someone gets triggered and says, Coach Powers is saying I should take an SSRI. No, I'm not. I'm debunking this myth that you can't take an SSRI while you're tapering, that if you do so, you won't heal. If you come off benzos and you take an SSRI, you won't heal. That's not true. The risk is that some SSRIs can have side effects. Some of them can take a while to begin. Even in the initial stages, they can increase anxiety. And then sometimes they can be tough to come off of. And it leads me to one more point before I move on here. If you are on an SSRI and you're going to, you just came off your benzo or you're tapering your benzo, don't taper the SSRI. Wait, guys. It's another one of these, benzo misinformation that people say you won't heal unless you're off the SSRI. So I see people all the time. They're tapering off like 2 or 3 antidepressants. They're benzo, gabapentin. I mean, they're just tapering off a cocktail of chemicals and just going through hell. And I think that's totally needless. Just focus on the benzo. When you come off, give it some time, then maybe move on to the SSRI, gradually tapering. So that's my experience. SSRIs, yes, you can heal while taking them. They affect serotonin, not GABA. I don't even understand where the correlation in here is, or where these studies, which I can promise you don't exist, that are saying that you can't do this. That's just totally not true. So if you're worried about this and ruminating on this, take a deep breath. It'll be all right. Not everything you read on the internet's true, guys. Number 2, cold turkey or rapid taper. Oh my God, how many times I hear this. I am different. I was cold turkeyed, or I was rapidly tapered. Guys, millions of people every year are cold turkeyed or rapidly tapered, and they heal just fine. Right? They heal just fine, which kind of brings me to a later point when we talk about receptor damage. Well, if you're tapered too fast, you'll have receptor damage. And well, how come all these other people are tapered really fast or cold turkeyed and they seem to heal pretty damn good? Many of you listening right now can probably remember a time when you were on benzos, and you might think, well, I was on Xanax, for like 3 or 5 years. And I remember coming off that the first time, like really easy and really quickly. I mean, I've had many clients that said, one day I just stopped taking my Xanax. I go, really? Yeah, I was on 1 milligram. I just stopped taking it. I go, wow. And they didn't even have that much of side effects. They said, I was a little rough for like a month or 2 maybe, but that was it. Right? So we can't say that a rapid taper or going cold turkey absolutely equals this, because that's not true. It's not true compared to the big percentage. And I'm sorry if that bothers anyone. It's the truth hurts sometimes. That is absolutely true. You can't deny it. And what I'm saying is not, again, because listen, although I'm debunking these things, I'm not advocating things. I think a slow, self-driven, self-led taper is always going to be the best bet. But if you're someone who's sitting here freaking out, thinking because you were cold turkeyed or because you were rapidly tapered over several weeks, that somehow you can't heal, that's not true. Now, I'm not saying that maybe, there was so much going on and it was so traumatic for you that there isn't an argument that maybe you do need to reinstate and then do a gradual taper at a slow pace or something like that. That sometimes is on the table, although I think people jump to it way too fast. I think we jump to it way too fast. We don't even really give ourselves enough time to heal, and then we're back on a benzo and thinking, I just think it's bad news. I think it's bad news at that point. But it can happen. So if you're cold turkey or rapid taper, guys, I've seen countless people that healed very quick. I even worked in NA, and I saw people that were coming off of like 100 milligrams of Valium and were basically pretty much cold turkeyed off of it. And they bounced back in a few months or 6 months. And, so again, we can't use an absolute in all of this. Can SSRIs harm people? Sure. Can they really help people? Yes. Right? Can cold turkey and rapid taper harm people? Yes. But can some people do it and come right out of it and be all right? Sure. And not to mention, a cold turkey or a rapid taper isn't always the worst thing, guys. Someone who's tapering 3 to 5 plus years in acute withdrawal, I would say, or is just as bad, if not worse place. Because now you've got all this damage going on for such a long period of time with a bunch of manifestations of other illnesses, agoraphobia, panic disorder, insomnia, right? Health anxieties, muscle pain, nerve pain, all this kind of stuff is developing, IBS and ulcers, and right. So again, I'm just telling you what I've seen and what I know. I've seen many people that were cold turkey or rapid taper and they healed just fine. That is not a guarantee that you can't heal. And I hope this has given you peace of mind. I don't want this video to be triggering or upsetting to anybody. In fact, I'm trying to lull down your rumination, your fears, to say, hey, I think there's a lot of bad information here and you've been fed some of it. Be careful, swallowing that misinformation. The next thing I want to talk about is the percentages of protracted withdrawal syndrome, right? Again, the BIC, the Benzo Information Coalition, who I have a love-hate relationship with, because while they have a lot of great things to offer and they're very helpful and they're fighting the good fight, I don't fully agree with the way they're fighting it, their approach, and certainly a lot of the doom and gloom information they share with a sort of authoritative tone, and like one size fits all kind of narrative. And I think that's bad news, guys. It's bad news. Maybe one day we can change some of that, but anyway, for now, the percentages of protracting and all this with the way they I've seen some of their data right on their front page. It doesn't correlate. In fact, if you look at the front page and the way they list the data, and they actually go to the article and look at and start reading it, there's a little bit of kind of, dare I say, cherry picking or presenting certain aspects of information a little bit, slightly out of context, I guess, that presents this information and makes it look a lot worse than it is, when I would argue probably a very, 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 very small percentage of people have protracted. Now, you got 30 million people in America alone, easily, maybe much more higher right now, on benzos, hundreds of millions across the world coming off of this. And we look in these forums, there's thousands of people, hundreds of people, right? The numbers don't add up. And some of these people, many of these people have been in here for years. So these are people that, they didn't come in here last month. And, these numbers will be grossly higher, guys. Millions of people coming off. If 10%, 20% of them were being debilitated and all this craziness going on, don't you think this would be more known? And don't you think it's odd that every doctor you talk to, I know every doctor I've spoken to, and I've spoken to a hell of a lot of them, hundreds of them at this point, not just, psychiatrists, but general practitioners, sleep doctors, these guys don't know about benzos. They don't. And so what are we led to believe here? It's a big mass conspiracy. They're all getting together in some secret website and going like, let's pretend we don't know about this, guys. Now, sure, some of them, I would bet $1 million, do know about it. And they're gaslighting, lying, terrible doctors, right? Let's not confuse the issue. But I'm saying we're talking about thousands and thousands of doctors. I think there was like 20,000 in the United States, I want to say. I read a number like that. It might be higher. And none of these people know benzos. Nobody's seen this. It's not a conspiracy. They don't see it because it's very, very rare. And I think the numbers point to that, right? Does that help your situation? No, it doesn't, actually, because if the numbers were higher, we'd have a lot more research and attention to this, and maybe it wouldn't be the problem it is today. But I'm just saying the percentages are grossly overreported. Next is histamine versus food phobias. I mean, everybody's worried about food. I can't eat this. I can't eat that. I've got clients that are eating 2 or 3 or 4 foods. That's it. I mean, that's it. It's dreadful. They get depressed just by the sheer lack of dopamine or pleasure they get out of their food. I mean, they're boiling chicken and eating walnuts. And I mean, it's like, and sure as I say that, someone will say, well, you can't eat chicken and walnuts. Okay, whatever. That's the other thing, guys. Nobody agrees on the diet, right? And you guys are smart enough now. You've been in the community. You've seen it. Is it keto? Is it carnivore? Is it vegan? Is it paleo? Is it Mediterranean? It'll make your head spin. And what I see is everybody that has a phobia of food for whatever reason, and sometimes just eating food can make you anxious a little bit. It doesn't necessarily have to be a histamine. Sometimes it's just, blood levels and sugars and, it's a lot of complex things going on there. But we all sweep it under the umbrella of it's a histamine. It's coming from the benzo. It's a benzo side effect. And then we start avoiding it and isolating our foods. And we start to develop food phobias. And I've seen it get wacky places where people are measuring their foods, their water, sodium, salt, pepper. I mean, you name it. I mean, I've seen the most just intense kind of food phobia, food OCD, if you would. And the reality is here, guys, a lot of times it's not what you think it is. And even if it were some histamine or this or that, the approach isn't to just throw it all out and go crazy on a diet, on some restrictive diet where you're dropping body weight and, denying yourself foods. I mean, I've had many, many, many people, guys, hear me out, that came to me, I've got histamines. I said, well, it sounds like you have a food phobia, but let's see. And we start working on some graded exposure. And sure enough, 2 or 3 months later, they're eating good food again. And boom, the histamine went away. Lo and behold, imagine that. Now, again, is Coach Power saying that histamine can't be a problem? No, guys. Of course, some people can have histamine issues. Of course, they can have some foods that just, for whatever reason, for reasons we may not even know. If you eat a certain food and every time you eat the damn thing, you get flared up, stop eating it. Avoid it. Maybe not forever, of course, but for the time being, sure. Right? What I'm also saying is when you get in the groups, you're highly suggestive. And if you're hearing people talk about these things and demonize them and make all these boogeymen, you are in a situation with not having the GABA to protect your fight or flight center. You're going to latch on to everything. I mean, I could tell, and I have in experiments that told clients, I've heard that the color red can be a problem. And they say, oh my God, that's so weird you say that. The color red has been a problem for me. Yes, I think it has something to do with like the spectrum of light and how it hits the optic nerve, and it creates a signal to the, whatever. Insert pseudoscience, doesn't matter. If it sounds remotely believable, it's powerful enough for, your brain to create a psychogenic or nocebo effect. So relax on the food and the histamines, guys. That's my advice. And that's also in Dr. Heather Ashton's advice, right? Nobody seems to listen to her very much anymore, which pains me. It's a whole nother topic. But, less is more. Relax, relax, relax. Now, avoidance and rest, avoidance rest theory, I would call it, the lay and pray theory or model of recovery. So tired of that one. I mean, the bulk of my work has been pushing back against that. That avoidance, rest, lay and pray model literally almost killed me. It almost killed me. I put that right up there with benzos, because when I switched it up, I started doing some new things. Oh man, I could handle the benzos, and it was no walk in the park, but it was doable. Versus when I was doing everything I was reading, I tried this diet, I tried that, eliminations and avoidance and laying in bed and just waiting for the storm to pass. No, things got worse. I gained weight. I got depressed. I stopped sleeping. I wanted to kill myself. It was terrible. Once I started to do some things differently, things started to get better, right? So the avoidance rest in theory model that everybody's telling you, that's not true. It's not a good model, guys. Now, there are a time and place for everything. And there was times that I needed to rest for an extended period. Maybe a couple weeks or something. I was in a real bad way. But then you have to peel yourself out of that and get back. You've got to do the right things. And even if you're resting, it doesn't mean you need to be going on walks and working out or something. But you can be lulling your nervous system. You can still be doing therapeutic things to help your situation. Right? I'm talking about people that just sort of lay there and stare at the wall and count them, watch the clock. It's a bad model, guys. Receptor damage, coming back to that one, I could, spin my head around and spit green pea soup like The Exorcist on this one. Again, is there receptor damage? What does that look like? What does that mean? Yeah, sure. There's, the truth in all of this. There's truth in all of this in the middle somewhere, right? There's a gray area in all of this. But again, you can't treat everything and everyone and every situation the same way, under the same absolute claims. It's not fair. And I've personally seen people come off of high doses of benzo, ripped off, and in 2 or 3 months, they're damn near, I've actually had them say, I feel better now, 2 months, 3 months off of benzos than I did on them, right? So where was their receptor damage? How come they didn't get receptor damage? Right? The theory, for something to hold up, it needs to hold up across the board, right? It has to hold up across the board. Like diabetes, we know that the relationship between sugar and diabetes. You'll never find a person who can just eat handfuls of sugar and they go, well, I don't know. My diabetes and my blood sugar never fluctuates, right? It doesn't work that way, right? Hypertension, all of this stuff, anything else, it doesn't work that way. And again, the communities are espousing this narrative that we all have receptor damage. Well, I'm here to tell you it's not all receptor damage, for one, right? Might be impartial, but receptors are damaged, and receptors, and I don't even know if the word damage is necessarily the right word, right? I mean, it's just the chemistry and the physiology of the brain changing. This could happen with a lot of things: food, sex, alcohol, opiates, cocaine, heroin. You rip that drug off and the brain goes crazy, and you see these receptors and these synapses just throwing a damn fit. And then a synaptic pruning happens where they start to dwindle. Like, I don't see where benzos is all that different, to be honest, in this situation. Not in that regard. Could there be receptor damage? Sure. Right? Is that a death sentence? Does that mean you can't heal and all that? No. And it also isn't the greater physiology and perspective of healing either, I would argue. right? There's more going on there. As cortisol goes up, as adrenaline goes up, the need for more GABA to sort of help lull that limbic system and that fight or flight center to calm those symptoms of withdrawal, the more that increases, more that it's needed. On the other hand, the more that you can increase dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, the good neurotransmitters, the less the less you'll need GABA. So GABA isn't everything, guys. It isn't everything. There's more going on here, and that should give you some peace of mind. You should hear that and go, well, that's good to know that it's not all receptor damage, and that, if I increase the good chemistry and I can help decrease the so-called bad chemistry, that I can really have an impact on my recovery, right? This is good stuff. It's good news. And this leads me to my next point. Something I hear all the time is some of these really high-end, expensive benzo coaches even are espousing this, that therapy doesn't work. Exposure therapy doesn't work. Let's start with therapy. Why doesn't therapy work? Why doesn't it work? How will learning how to understand your brain and treat anxiety, how will that not be on some level effective? But coach, it's because it's chemical. Well, everything's chemical, guys. For one, everything's chemical. Let's start there. But two, I hear what you're saying, and I agree. There's a chemical anxiety component that cannot be denied. And what happens is it makes therapy and all these things an uphill battle. Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that those things can't be effective, impactful. That's absolutely not true. I've seen people who, this is all I do as a coach, working with people and having my recovery program and my benzo school. I cannot tell you how many times I have seen this. And there's people listening right now. It's in the school. And they know this is true. The people come into my let's just talk about the school. Somebody comes in, they're completely just frazzled. Their head's spinning. They're ruminating around the clock. They can't sleep. Oh my God, their fear is through the roof. And just by giving them some hope, some direction, some tools, they're able to lull that back down, get that rumination under control, tame the beast a little bit more, and God does the symptoms and severity of symptoms come down, right? This is not a myth. This is absolutely true. And if it wasn't true, I wouldn't still be here. I wouldn't be booked out 2 or 3 months in advance for people wanting to talk to me. Why? Why would that happen if I'm full of crap and that doesn't work? You know what I mean? I'm probably booked out more than any other coach that I know of, right? For a reason, because the people that give it a chance, they get results. And they say, wait a minute. I think I was fed something that wasn't true, and I was buying into it. And I've even had people come to me 6 years removed, 10 years removed, and then they were drinking the Kool-Aid, and they start to see some progress, and they start to go, wait a minute. Maybe Coach Powers is right. Maybe there is a little bit more we can do, right? I'm not saying it's your pre-existing condition or this or that. So please, guys, if you're sitting here trying to disagree with me in your mind and adding arguments to what I'm saying, that's you. That's not me. I'm not saying any of that, right? I'm not saying that. I think I'm being very middle of the road here. I'm just pushing back against some of what I consider to be benzo misinformation, right? But I've seen people, man, more times I can tell you, that were just completely stuck, years off, and calling it benzo damage and all of this, when really they were looking at agoraphobia or insomnia or depression or panic disorder or health anxiety or health OCD, And once we started working on these things holistically, things started to improve again, right? So therapy can work. The other point is that exposure therapy doesn't work. I've heard a lot of coaches talking about this. Why? Ask them why. Guys, whenever you're talking to anybody gives you information like it's, some kind of absolute or authority, ask them why. Why doesn't this work? Right? Why doesn't exposure therapy work? And they'll say, if they have any reason other than I read it somewhere, that's not a great answer. Like you go to a mechanic and you go, this is wrong with your car. You go, why? They go, I don't know. I read it somewhere. What? You read it somewhere? I want to know. You should know. And the ones that may have an idea, they'll say things like, well, because the way benzos impact the limbic system, it kind of tranquilizes that part of the brain, so you're never able to form new pathways. Oh, yes, you can. You can form bad pathways all damn day. In a matter of weeks, you can become phobic of water. right? So you can absolutely make pathways. We see it in abundance in the negative terms. But yes, you fire two nerves at the same time, they will wire together. That is a fact of neuroplasticity. You can Google search it. Don't take my word for it, right? Exposure therapy still can work. Again, guys, is it an uphill battle in withdrawal? Yes. That chemical, withdrawal is sending a fear signal constantly. But there's a secondary component where we get attached to the fear signal, where we get involved with rumination, incessant thinking, all of the triggers, all this stuff that starts to go on internally. We exacerbate the situation. And I have had many clients, and personally, I know it's anecdotal, myself, I was bedbound for months. I couldn't drive my car for almost 2 years. I mean, I remember doing exposure therapy, and making it to the mailbox after a month was like amazing. Oh my God. I walked out my front door and I couldn't even get to the mailbox at one point. And, weeks later, I'm at the mailbox. A few more weeks later, I'm 2 houses down. A few weeks later, I'm at the stop sign. I'm going around the block. I'm walking a mile away from the house, right? I'm driving again. Yes, exposure therapy absolutely does work. And the people that say that the benzo tranquilize it, nobody, raise your hand right now if you're getting a tranquilizing effect from your benzo, right? How many of you guys can say that when you take your benzo, you feel sedated? I mean, almost none of you, I'm guessing, right? Now, maybe some of you on a heavy dose of Klonopin, you're getting a heaviness feeling, but you're still anxious. You're still in withdrawal. You're still terrified, right? And that's the idea, is how are we going to, show the brain something that it's deemed and conditioned to believe is dangerous, and then do an exposure graded desensitization is what it is. You desensitize that reaction to that exposure. How are we going to do that if the benzos is doing all the heavy lifting, right? That's the idea. So if I'm afraid of, let's say, spiders, and you give me a big dose of Xanax, man, I'll hold a spider. I have no fight or flight. You've tranquilized that part of the brain. Sure, that's going to be hard to do exposure. That's not going to really work, right? Although, in theory, it still could work because you're still creating pathways, and who knows? No one's ever run that experiment. But anyway, it's not important. But the idea is, yes, exposure therapy absolutely can work on during withdrawal on benzos, especially post-benzo. And you absolutely should be doing some level of exposure. I don't care if it's just sitting in your backyard. Do not, don't slip into that agoraphobia state where, what I call the incredible shrinking world syndrome. You're right. Where everything just keeps shrinking. And before you know it, you can't get off your bed, right? It's like that game when you were a kid, everything's lava. You can't get off the bed. It'll burn you. So exposure therapy works, guys. That's the gist here. Absolutely. That's whoever tells you that it doesn't, I'd be very wary of them. Very wary of them, especially if you're paying them money. Benzos are evil. They're not evil. Evil, what is evil? First off, what is evil? Then you might say, well, not evil, but they're not good. Okay, what about the millions of people that it helps? Helps them sleep, get through their life, live a normal quality without crippling anxiety? What about the people that were able to take it very responsibly, took a small dose for a short period of time while doing a certain type of therapy, and it was just what they needed to get them around that corner, and they tapered off, and they lived a great life? What about those people? And I get it. Again, as I'm saying all this, I'm sure people are thumbs down and cursing me out in their head, and they've probably turned off the video, and that's all good and fine. I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to give you guys some truth from a guy who's got 10 plus years in clinical psychology, from a guy who was on a high dose of benzos for a long period of time, who rehabbed himself off of it, made more than a full recovery, and has now been working with thousands of people from around the world. Take that with what you will. Maybe that doesn't mean a lot to you, right? I think it should mean something. And I'm here to tell you, benzos are not evil. I don't like them, right? I've spent the last 10 years of my life. I almost died because of them. I'm not a big fan of them. I'm not even a big fan of big pharma in general. I'm very suspicious of a lot of things. I'm not a big fan of psychiatrists. I think psychiatrists are some of the worst doctors on the planet. That said, there's some really good ones. There's some that have saved lives. And benzos are not evil, no more than opiates. Right? It's how you use it. Like guns. It's like the same argument with a gun, right? Guns are evil. No, they're not. In the wrong hands, yes, they can be used for evil. Benzos are not necessarily evil. There's 3,000 people a year that die of aspirins in America alone. Nobody's, raging that we need to remove aspirins. 24 people a year die of corks while opening up a champagne bottle. Nobody's banning corks. Benzos are not evil. They're a very dangerous drug with some serious damn withdrawal effects, and doctors need to be made aware of it. They need to stop handing them out like Tic Tacs. They need to have informed consent. Means you need to be made well aware. Everybody needs to be made well aware of the damage, the potential damage of these damn drugs. Their changes need to be made in protocol of withdrawals and all kinds of stuff, right? The whole mentality around benzos needs to change 100%. But benzos themselves are not evil. And be careful with that narrative, guys, because if you're telling yourself that benzos are evil and taking benzos while you're tapering, you're essentially telling your limbic system that I'm eating poison. And what's that limbic system going to do? It's going to go, what? We're in danger? Boom, here's a big dose of fight or flight chemistry. Did that help you? No, you feel way worse now. I mean, if only for self-preservation, stop calling them evil. They're an unfortunate, dangerous drug. They need to be they need to be really monitored, and there needs to be a hell of a lot of changes. But they're not evil, right? And I hope I didn't lose some of you at this point, but I suspect I probably have. The pre-existing conditions went away. I've seen big benzo coaches, popular benzo coaches saying this nonsense. Pre-existing conditions don't go away, right? It's not a rash, right? If you had anxiety, whatever the hell you had, I mean, some things can like clear up, like insomnia and certain things. But if you had major depression or certain phobias or PTSD, anxiety, it doesn't just go away coming off a damn benzo. Why would it? And I'm not going to name any names, but you guys know some of the people I'm talking about. I'm sure you've heard some of this, right? I mean, some of the people in here, they downplay benzos or downplay their pre-existing conditions. Like, oh, I had a little bit of work stress and I took a benzo and, 50 years later, I'm dying. It's like, no, guys, no. That is extremely, extremely rare. There's more to that story. And some of you are nodding your head yes right now, and some of you are shaking angrily with your arms crossed maybe. But it's true. Pre-existing conditions don't just go away. And if you are on the other side of this and you say, well, Dave, that's not true for me. I'm 3 years off now and I had this or that, maybe anxiety or something or agoraphobia, and it's gone now. Then I would ask you, how much work did you do in the last 3 years? I'm guessing you did a lot of work. I'm guessing you grew and changed and did some amazing things in your recovery. So they didn't just go away. They were treated. And maybe you were thinking you were treating benzos, but at the same time, you really were treating your anxiety disorder, perhaps. But they don't go away. And that's my point, right? Whatever was there for most of us is still going to be there in the end. And sometimes for a temporary, a short period of time, it's going to be even worse. It's going to be a little more amplified, right? So expect that, roll with it, understand it's temporary, and work to heal it. Don't just sit back and say, well, it's benzo damage, damn it. Nothing I can do about it. Yep, 3 years out, I still have health anxiety. Must be benzo damage. No, it's not. Chances are, anyway, it's not. Then again, not saying that you can't be 3 years out with benzo damage. Absolutely. Again, nasty drug. But you know what else you can do that? What else can cause that? Prednisone, Cipro, a host of meds can cause long-term or sometimes permanent problems. Right? So let's not confuse the issue here with what I'm saying. Because again, I think some of you guys want to just disagree with me. I mean, I know I have some people that just listen and immediately, as soon as the video starts, they just dislike, thumbs down, and they're just sitting here having like some kind of argument with me in their head. Well, because so-and-so that I follow said this or that. Well, guys, come on. This isn't a pissing contest. It's not a competition. I'm just trying to provide you with some alternative explanations and perceptions on how to look at it. And I think that's a good thing. It should be welcomed, right? I'm so tired of all the doom and gloom and all the benzo misinformation in the community. I've literally watched people whose lives could have been saved. They ended their life because they just wouldn't get on an SSRI. Because Coach so-and-so or Dr. so-and-so said, and I just think, you know what? Anybody who's preaching that and somebody goes and takes their life, their blood's on your hands. Shame on you. Hey everyone, I'm Coach Powers and I'm excited to announce the launch of my new online benzo recovery school. The school launched with Module 1 and will have a total of 4 modules, each module with a dozen or more video lessons. Here are some contents in Module 1. This creates the basis for my recovery program. If you know anything about my approach to benzo recovery, you know I'm a bit different than other benzo coaches in that I do not subscribe to the lay and pray model of recovery. Instead, I believe benzo injury is a kind of neurological injury that requires neurological rehabilitation. This neurological rehabilitation encompasses learning how to access our good chemistry while also reducing the so-called bad chemistry, cortisol and adrenaline, and also learning how to lull down our hypervigilant limbic system. This includes learning techniques in CBT, DBT, mindfulness therapy, and neuroplasticity building. Now, I've studied clinical psychology for the last 15 years of my life, and my benzo recovery program encompasses the same things that I use to make my own recovery after a 10-year, 40 milligram Valium dependence. My recovery program observes 4 stages of recovery with 3 tiers of development. In fact, my stages are all focused on development. This makes them different than the 3 obvious stages of recovery, which include the pre-taper, the taper, and post-taper. Instead, my stages serve as a kind of developmental roadmap, with each stage serving as a bridge to the following stage. These 4 stages include Stage 1, restoring hope, Stage 2, the new beginning, Stage 3, the montage, and Stage 4, coming home. Perhaps most importantly, each stage has 3 key learning goals and also 3 key roadblocks. These stages revealed themselves to me after years of working with literally thousands of people from all around the world. After enough experience, you begin to see patterns and trends, and you see where people triumph and what roadblocks can prevent them from moving forward. Now remember, just because you may have come off your benzo doesn't mean you automatically reach Stage 4, the final stage. Again, these are developmental stages, which is why someone can come off of their benzo and still be stuck in their recovery. In fact, it's entirely possible to come off of your benzo and be stuck in Stage 1. Here are some other features the online benzo recovery school offers. Aside from being a school, it's also a positive focused support group. And believe me when I tell you, my students are a different breed of benzo warriors. They are wise, they are driven, and they understand the mission. I, Coach Powers, will also be doing live video Q&A weekly in the community, talking, teaching, and answering questions from all of you. There will be downloadable resources such as a rumination and exposure therapy log, templates for checklists, and much more. Additionally, there will be new benzo sleep affirmation videos exclusive for the school, as well as new and early original content. There will be a regular benzo blog, benzo-related news, and even a private early screening for my benzo recovery feature film, Lake of Fire. All of this and only for a special introductory rate of $30 monthly while time lasts. So come join the positive community and let's work together on facilitating our recovery. See you there.